Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. The learner, you've brought us some really interesting stuff to dig into this time. Like always our goal is to really get to the heart of it all, help you absorb the knowledge you need, but without getting bogged down. No filler, no wasted time.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about like connecting those dots, seeing the big picture, and having those like aha moments, but without feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
Like that's what we aim for with these deep dives.
Right. And today, we're going deep into self-defense and combatives, specifically, sparked by these excerpts you sent us from this Self-Defense and Combatives Omnibus. And, this is not just about, throwing a punch or two. This book really covers a lot of ground. It goes from just, being more aware of your surroundings to, the mental side of things, training methods that work when you're under pressure, and even the legal aspects, which can be tricky. It's a comprehensive look, and we're going to pull out the most valuable, the most immediately useful things for you.
And right away, something the book points out really resonated with me. They reference this Bill Hicks bit, about how the media often portrays this super dangerous world, way more dangerous than what most of us actually experience every day, right?
Right.
And then they build on that by saying some self-defense instructors, they actually kind of exploit that fear. They play up the danger to try to sell their training and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like preying on people's anxieties. But the book is pretty clear about encouraging a healthy mindset, right? It's not about being oblivious to potential dangers,
Right.
but you don't want to let fear, just completely control you. So, keeping that balanced view in mind. Let's jump into the heart of what the book calls your self-protection game plan. And it all starts with awareness.
Okay, so awareness. It's a buzzword. We hear it all the time.
Right.
But the book really hammers home that it's the foundation of everything. It's about being switched on,
Yeah.
tuned into your environment, constantly scanning for any signs of trouble. And the earlier you pick up on something, the more options you have, right? Ideally, you can avoid a confrontation entirely.
Yeah, and the book contrasts this with how a lot of us operate in our daily lives, right? We're so busy, so distracted. Our faces are glued to our
Right.
phones, and we're essentially switched off, not really paying attention to our surroundings. And in that state, you miss those subtle cues, those little details that are out of place, and you can easily walk right into a bad situation without even realizing it until it's too late.
Yeah, and they make a good point. When you're in unfamiliar places or places can be a bit dodgy,
Yeah.
yeah, your awareness should be heightened, right? But that doesn't mean being constantly anxious or paranoid.
Hmm.
It's more about a relaxed alertness, having your senses up a bit.
Right, right.
The beauty of cultivating this everyday awareness is you start to notice those threats, those risky spots, and you can just avoid them altogether.
Yeah. So the next piece of the self-protection puzzle is target hardening. Now, this doesn't mean you suddenly become, some kind of invulnerable badass.
Right.
It's more about not presenting yourself as, an easy target, an easy mark. So it's about your posture, the way you carry yourself, even how you interact with people. Predators often look for signs of vulnerability.
Exactly, exactly. And following that is the super simple principle of avoidance. The book stresses this over and over again. Your top priority, always stay out of harm's way.
Right.
Remove yourself from situations that could potentially turn dangerous. It sounds obvious, but it goes back to that awareness we were talking about. You need to see the trouble brewing to avoid it, right?
Right. Then we get to a really important stage, verbal de-escalation. So if you do find yourself in a tense situation, the next step is trying to talk your way out of it. The goal here is to use your words with confidence, with assertiveness, to diffuse the situation before it turns physical.
Uh,
The book actually suggests that surprisingly often a calm and firm approach can be enough to prevent things from escalating.
yeah, and the final stage in this initial game plan is preemptive action.
Mm.
Now, I know this might sound, a little harsh, but the logic is if you've tried to de-escalate the situation verbally, and you get a clear sign that an attack is imminent, whether it's through their words, their stance, their body language, acting first before they make a move, it's often your best option. It's about stopping the escalation right there, taking away their initiative.
Right. Okay. So that's the basic roadmap. Now, let's go back to awareness, because the book really emphasizes that this is not just some throwaway concept. It's so crucial that it deserves a much deeper look. The book even points out how some self-defense instruction kind of glosses over this. They're so eager to get to the physical techniques. But the book argues, pretty convincingly, that awareness is so much more than just saying pay attention. Right.
Yeah, and what's really insightful is how they break down awareness into the different aspects, starting with self-awareness. The idea is the better you understand yourself, your reactions, your tendencies, the better you can understand and even predict how others might behave. You can kind of put yourself in their shoes and recognize patterns.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're tuned into your own triggers, how you react under pressure, you'll be more likely to spot those same patterns in someone who might be, heading towards aggression.
Right, exactly.
And when conflict does happen, self-awareness allows you to play to your strengths and be mindful of your weaknesses.
Yeah, for sure. And then we move into situational awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which is all about being present, being engaged with your surroundings. The book points out how, with modern life being so hectic and us being constantly connected to technology, we're often so focused inwards that we become almost oblivious to what's happening around us in the real world.
Yeah, and when you're switched off like that, you're essentially blind to potential dangers.
Okay.
You don't even register those warning signs until it's too late. And the book actually gives some very specific examples of what to watch out for when you're facing a potential aggressor. Yeah. Things like, a sudden shift in their tone of voice. Maybe it becomes very clipped. They start using like one-word answers, or they rapidly close the distance between you. And then there are shifts in body language, like clenching their fists, tensing their shoulders, Recognizing these pre-contact cues early on gives you a much better chance to react proactively.
It's like driving. They use this analogy in the book.
Oh, yeah.
When you're behind the wheel, you're constantly scanning your mirrors, checking your speed, anticipating what other cars are going to do. You're processing multiple things at once. And that's kind of the ongoing, almost subconscious awareness you want to have in your daily life.
Right. And this awareness ties directly into your body language and your communication. And the book really emphasizes this. It makes a pretty bold statement. It says that your overall presentation, how you come across to a potential threat, will strongly influence whether they see you as a target or someone to avoid.
Yeah, that's huge, right? The way you project yourself has a massive impact. And what's interesting is how the book breaks down communication in a self-defense context into these 4 stages: non-fight communication, pre-fight communication, in-fight communication, and post-fight communication.
Okay.
Let's focus on that first one for a second, that non-fight communication. This is basically the message you're sending out just through your demeanor and body language when you're not in any immediate danger.
Right. So basically like everyday life.
Exactly. And the book argues that when someone is sizing up a potential victim, one of the first things they unconsciously assess is that person's body language. Do you walk with confidence and purpose, or do you look hesitant and unsure? Like you're broadcasting vulnerability. Our nonverbal cues speak volumes.
Yeah, so making yourself a harder target starts with this really fundamental aspect of how you project yourself to the world, right? If you lack confidence, you always seem uncertain or preoccupied. People will pick up on that through your posture, your tone, even the way you move. And that includes people with bad intentions.
For sure.
Yeah.
This leads us to the idea of fencing as a pre-fight communication tool. Now, we're not talking about grabbing swords or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's about how you manage the space around you to communicate your intentions to a potential threat. So when you're fencing, you're signaling non-verbally that you want a peaceful resolution.
Right.
But you're also ready to use force if you have to. You're setting a boundary. And you're making it clear that crossing that boundary has consequences. And, the book says that a surprising number of confrontations can be diffused just at this stage.
Yeah.
Just by presenting yourself in an assertive but non-confrontational way.
So basically project confidence, but don't be aggressive, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Find that balance. And, the book really drives home the point that communication is essential at every stage of self-defense. Physical skills are obviously important.
Right.
But they're actually secondary to your ability to communicate effectively. Through your body language, your tone, your words, whether you're walking down the street or facing an aggressor or even explaining your actions afterward. Self-defense, in this view, is as much about communication as it is about fighting techniques.
Okay, so now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the internal aspects of self-defense.
Okay.
How you manage your mindset, your fear, and how you access the aggression that you might need in a dangerous situation. The book is pretty clear that your ability to control your mind is absolutely critical when facing violence.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. They talk about developing this internal switch that you can consciously flip when you're faced with a threat.
Right.
This switch allows you to tap into what they call cold aggression and this powerful forward drive mentality. The idea is to keep that switch flipped until the threat is neutralized. And that often means until your attacker is down.
Okay, so it's like a mental state you can activate on demand.
Exactly, yeah. And they acknowledge that the fear of violence it's deeply ingrained in us. And the goal isn't to eliminate fear entirely.
Right.
Fear serves a purpose. It's a survival mechanism, right?
Right.
But when your life is on the line, you need to be able to act despite that fear.
Right. The book then explores this idea of capacity levels for violence, and this is a fascinating concept. It challenges any limitations you might have about what you're capable of doing in a life or death situation. Like you might think, oh, I could never hurt someone like that.
Right.
But the book suggests that under extreme stress, your survival instincts can kick in, and you might surprise yourself with what you're able to do.
Yeah, it's like we have these hidden reserves of power and aggression. And they even bring up these historical examples of seemingly ordinary people who committed pretty horrific acts under extreme circumstances.
Oh, wow.
Right. And they guide you through this mental exercise. They ask you to imagine a violent encounter and visualize yourself doing what you need to do to stop the attack, focusing solely on survival.
Okay, so you're mentally rehearsing for a dangerous situation.
Exactly. And then they contrast that with imagining a scenario where you can resolve things peacefully, through escape or dialogue. This helps you explore that range of responses that you might have.
Right, so you're preparing for different possibilities.
Exactly.
Okay. So then they dive into the role of fear and adrenaline in self-defense.
Yeah, and they emphasize that while these are natural, powerful responses, if you don't understand and manage them, they can actually work against you. They can incapacitate you.
So these are not like inherently bad things.
No, they're natural physiological reactions, but you need to know how to work with them. And the book explains what happens in your body when adrenaline surges, and it really stresses the importance of understanding those effects so you can still function when they hit. It describes those common fear responses, that feeling that things are suddenly going off, and how experience through realistic training combined with knowledge about these responses is what allows you to stay effective even when you're flooded with adrenaline.
Yep. Okay. So knowledge and experience are key to managing fear.
Exactly, yeah. And to further illustrate that point, the author shares this personal anecdote about his time as doorman,
Oh, okay.
And he had this really tense encounter, this threatening situation. And the biggest lesson he learned was that staying active, engaging with the situation, was much better than retreating or backing down, which just amplified his fear.
So facing the fear head on helped him control it.
Exactly, yeah. And they make a distinction between what they call real fear and psychological fear.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Real fear is that instinctive feeling when you're in immediate danger, right?
Right.
It's your survival system kicking in.
Yeah.
Psychological fear, on the other hand, is often rooted in ego or past experiences, and it's not necessarily tied to a present life-threatening situation. So fear acts as a warning signal,
Right.
triggering that fight-or-flight response. But what's interesting is they point out that when you go into full-on survival mode, when you're really in fight mode, that feeling of fear often recedes. You become hyper-focused on the threat.
Okay, so fear is like an alarm, but it can also shut down your ability to think clearly if you let it.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And this brings us to how they view combatives training. They emphasize that it's about preparing for real violence,
Yeah.
No artificial rules, no pretense, no fancy rituals or belts or anything like that, just what has been proven to work in a real fight. And they argue that this direct, realistic approach to training builds real confidence because you're confronting, realistic threats head on.
So it's not about looking cool or earning belts. It's about being effective in a dangerous situation.
Exactly, yeah. And that confidence, they explain, often leads to better situational control, which means being able to manage the pre-fight stage of a confrontation in a way that gives you a better chance of a positive outcome. Ultimately, they say that The better your combative conditioning, the better your odds if a physical confrontation becomes unavoidable.
So basically, the more prepared you are mentally and physically,
Right.
the better you can handle a dangerous situation.
Exactly. And their definition of combatives is refreshingly straightforward. It's what works in a fight,
I like that.
right? It's about prioritizing effectiveness and results over opinions.
Right.
And they acknowledge that what works best can be very individual. They wisely caution against blindly following any one instructor or system. They encourage you to critically evaluate and test the techniques you learn for yourself. They even suggest, some degree of self-teaching to really understand those underlying principles.
So it's about being proactive, questioning things, and figuring out what works for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And a crucial point they make is the importance of adding emotional content to your training, specifically intent and aggression. This makes sure that the physical techniques you practice will actually be accessible and effective under the extreme stress of a real fight.
Right. Because in a real fight, there's a lot of adrenaline, fear, anger, all those things.
Yeah, and they give some examples of drills like fence, strike, blast, and finish,
Yeah.
and the imaginary brawl drill, which are good ways to incorporate this emotional component into your training.
Okay, so you're not just practicing moves, you're training your mind as well.
Exactly, yeah. Mentally preparing for the real deal. And when it comes to the mechanics of striking, the book emphasizes that power doesn't just come from your arms. It originates from your core and your hips. It's about transferring energy through your body, kind of like a chain reaction.
Right, right. Using your whole body.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
They also introduce this concept called the serape effect, suggesting that angling your strikes downwards can actually increase their power.
Oh, interesting. So it's about using leverage and body mechanics to your advantage.
Exactly. And then there's the psychofactor, also known as rate coding, which is basically how fast your central nervous system can fire signals to your muscles. And this directly impacts your explosive power. Adrenaline naturally excites your CNS, which improves rate coding.
Right.
And they suggest a method called the stimulation method, which could be something like, throwing a medicine ball or doing some explosive movements right before you strike.
Oh, okay.
This helps you train your nervous system to react faster and generate that explosive power, even when you're not completely pumped full of adrenaline.
So it's like priming your body for action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the book goes on to discuss aggression itself,
Yeah.
acknowledging that it has biological, learned, and emotional components.
Yeah. They emphasize that learning to use aggression effectively is crucial for self-protection. But they also warn against uncontrolled, random aggression.
So it's about having control over your aggression, using it strategically when necessary.
Exactly. And this leads to a really important point. The book addresses this, potential hesitation to act decisively, which is often fueled by fear of legal repercussions.
Right. People worry about getting in trouble with the law if they defend themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And the book challenges that idea, that fear of legal consequences should prevent you from protecting yourself when you're facing a genuine, imminent threat.
Right. So it's about knowing your rights and understanding the law.
Exactly, yeah. And they actually argue that developing a combative mind, which includes being mentally prepared to use preemptive action when absolutely necessary, can actually lead to calmer, more controlled de-escalation in less critical situations.
Oh, interesting.
Because you're not coming from a place of fear or hesitation.
Right, right. You're more confident in your ability to handle yourself.
Exactly. And they outline steps to overcome that hesitation. Things like studying cases that support preemptive action, focusing your training on decisive strikes, and really building that belief in yourself that you can act effectively if you have to. The fundamental principle they keep coming back to is, in a life or death situation, it really comes down to you or them.
Yeah, that's a harsh truth, but it's important to be aware of it.
Absolutely. And then, briefly touching on legal considerations, the book does acknowledge the increasing trend of litigation, even in legitimate self-defense cases.
Yeah, which is scary.
Yeah, and they suggest that avoiding conflict when possible because of the potential legal hassle is generally a good idea.
Right.
But they make it very clear that in a truly critical situation, your main focus needs to be on generating that violent intent to shock and stop the attacker, regardless of the specific techniques you use.
So basically, survival comes first. You worry about the legal stuff later.
Exactly, yeah. Your primary goal is to get out of that situation alive. And they go into a few core combatives tactics. One is offensive pressure, which is about relentlessly moving forward, denying your attacker the space and time to mount their own attack. Then there's aggressive follow-up.
Okay.
This stresses the importance of continuing your attack until your attacker is down and clearly no longer a threat.
Right, so don't let up until the threat is neutralized.
Exactly. And then there's tactical savagery. This refers to techniques like biting or gouging, and it's for extreme situations only. The goal is to instill panic in the attacker and create an opportunity to escape.
Right, so these are like last-ditch efforts when your life is on the line.
Exactly.
Okay. The book emphasizes the importance of maintaining presence of mind throughout any conflict. It actually quotes Robert Greene,
Yeah.
saying that while emotions can be overwhelming and cloud your judgment, internal discipline, the kind you cultivate through practice and experience, is what allows you to control those emotions in the face of danger. They even suggest specific exercises to counterbalance strong emotions, especially focusing on confronting your fears in a safe environment.
Yeah, so you're basically training your mind to stay calm and focused under pressure.
Right. And then the book discusses what to look for in a good self-defense instructor. They emphasize the importance of a deep and practical understanding of the material, real-world experience, and a teaching style that's not superficial, that gets straight to the core of what really works. They share an anecdote about the powerful learning that can happen from a single real-life encounter where the stakes are high, highlighting the value of authentic experience.
Yeah, and they make a point of saying that simply having experience in certain professions, like being a bouncer or a police officer, doesn't automatically make you a good self-defense instructor,
Right.
because those roles often prioritize control and restraint, not the kind of decisive action you might need in a life or death fight.
So it's a different kind of mindset.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they stress that good combatives should be simple and easy to implement under stress. Less is more. Always questioning and testing the techniques.
So it's about practicality, what works in a real fight, not what looks fancy in the gym.
Exactly. And they introduced the palm strike as a basic, really easy to learn and surprisingly powerful technique, especially when aimed at the head. They really advocate for a head-hunting mentality in a critical situation.
Oh, wow. That's pretty intense.
Yeah, and they highlight the importance of good instruction, saying that it requires years of training and integrity. They're big proponents of including some form of sparring in your training, gradually increasing the contact, because it helps you build confidence and acclimate to hitting and being hit.
Right, so getting used to the real feel of a fight.
Exactly, yeah. While recognizing the difference between sport fighting and a street fight. And ultimately, they reiterate that the core of any self-defense program should be mastering those fundamental combatives techniques that are designed to quickly incapacitate an attacker, not just focusing on avoidance or verbal skills or legal theory. While those are important elements,
Right.
the main reason people seek self-defense training is to acquire the physical skills they need to protect themselves when all else fails.
Right. They want to know how to fight back effectively.
Exactly, yeah. And they introduced this concept of deep practice as a way to really accelerate skill acquisition. This involves consistently pushing yourself to the edge of your abilities and focusing on deliberate, attentive repetition,
Okay.
as opposed to, just going through the motions, what they call shallow practice. And they suggest studying masters of specific techniques, incorporating mental rehearsal, even reviewing training videos before you sleep or practice to really reinforce what you're learning.
So it's about being very intentional and strategic with your training, not just mindlessly repeating things.
Exactly. And they highlight self-coaching as a crucial part of this,
Okay.
encouraging you to regularly think about what worked well in training and what didn't. They emphasize that deep practice is not about how much time you put in. It's about the quality of those repetitions and building new neural connections.
So it's about making every rep count.
Exactly. They introduced this strategy called chunking, which involves breaking down complex skills into smaller, manageable pieces that you can master individually.
Right. So breaking things down into bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. And crucially, they point out that struggling, what they call desirable difficulty, is actually necessary for building those new neural pathways.
So it's like you have to challenge yourself in order to grow.
Exactly. Yeah. And they also talk about the importance of having fun in your training. They connect enjoyment with increased confidence, greater willingness to take risks, more passion for learning, and ultimately more effective skill development. They even quote guys like Joe Namath and George Bernard Shaw talking about the value of playfulness and fun. The key takeaway is to take your training seriously, but not take yourself too seriously.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's easy to get so caught up in the seriousness of it all.
Right, and they caution against a few counterproductive training habits.
Oh, okay, so what are those?
One is research porn, which is like excessive theoretical study that leads to overthinking and analysis paralysis.
So basically getting lost in the theory and not spending enough time on practical application.
Exactly, yeah. Another one is failure phobia. This is that tendency to avoid making mistakes in training, which actually hinders your learning. They say that it's important to make mistakes and to practice recovering from them. They also question the over-reliance on verbal distraction as a foolproof tactic before a preemptive strike, especially against people who are super aggressive. Instead, they introduce this concept called indexing.
Index.
Yeah, using your lead hand to make physical contact as a more reliable form of distraction.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it gives you a tactical advantage.
Okay.
And they explain indexing in detail. It's basically using your non-dominant hand to lightly touch or control your opponent's body, like their arm or shoulder, not for control in itself, but as a reference point.
Okay.
That helps you strike more accurately and powerfully.
So it's about using touch to set up your strikes.
Exactly. And they contrast this animalistic aggression, which can be useful in really desperate situations where you just need raw power, with a professional mindset. This is a more controlled type of aggression where your emotions are kept in check, fueling your actions without making you reckless.
So it's about channeling that aggression, using it strategically.
Exactly.
Okay. The book then addresses some common self-defense misconceptions, drawing from a Quora exchange.
Yeah. They highlight this perspective from a nurse named Bianca, who says that the best self-defense weapons for a smaller woman are her voice, her awareness, and her assertiveness.
Right, so it's about using your words and your presence to deter an attacker.
Exactly, yeah. And they caution against the false sense of security that comes with carrying a knife without proper training, because it could easily be used against you. They also emphasize that real confidence comes from experience in challenging situations, not from quick fixes or gadgets. They also bring up this interesting point that combatives training, if not approached with the right mindset, can actually make psychological fear worse in people who are already prone to hate and paranoia.
Wow, so it's like it can amplify those negative emotions if you're not careful.
Exactly.
Okay.
And finally, they argue that a good combative system has to be based on truth, sound physics, and real-world testing, not just theories or fancy techniques that haven't been pressure tested.
So it has to work in the real world, not just in the gym.
Exactly, yeah. And then they explain the role of pad drill training in striking-focused combative systems. They emphasize the importance of progressing from basic drills to more dynamic scenarios that closely mimic real attacks.
Okay.
They introduce this idea of a problem-solution mindset for creating drills based on common attack scenarios. They describe this one advanced drill that involves multiple moving pad holders to simulate the chaos of a multi-attacker situation.
Oh, wow. So it's about preparing for realistic scenarios.
Exactly, yeah. And they really stress the importance of building drills in layers, gradually increasing complexity, and always connecting them back to real-world possibilities.
Okay, so it's about progressive overload, starting with the basics and building up.
Exactly. The book strongly encourages practicing strikes to the head using both fists and open hands. And they emphasize the importance of getting feedback from your training partner to assess your effectiveness and identify any flaws in your technique. They also offer a nuanced view of that 10,000-hour rule, arguing that it's purposeful practice, focused, deliberate training with the intent to improve that really matters.
Right, so it's not just about putting in the hours, it's about how you train.
Exactly, yeah. And they caution against getting too caught up in minor technical details at the expense of power and impact. They also introduce this no reset rule in training, which means continuing to fight and adapt even after you make a mistake.
So it's like simulating the chaos of a real fight.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And they delve into how to harness this, what they call internal energy, which is like CNS activation, controlled aggression, and focused intent to boost the power of your strikes. They suggest visualization exercises and lots of heavy bag work to develop this internal power.
Right, so it's about training your mind and body to work together.
Exactly. And they stress that intent, having a clear and violent purpose behind your actions, is what makes your strikes truly effective. They talk about support skills, things like flinching, blocking, covering, checking, and indexing, as those crucial defensive elements that become automatic under pressure.
So it's about developing a full arsenal of defensive and offensive skills.
Exactly. And they also critique what they call unrealistic scenario training with padded suits, which often lacks the real pressure and unpredictability of a genuine threat. They reiterate that consistent practice of fundamental techniques is crucial for being able to use those tools effectively in any situation, what they call purposeful practice. They then outline a three-step process for identifying and fixing bad training habits. First, you have to honestly identify the problem. Second, understand the cause of the habit.
Okay.
And third, actively troubleshoot and consistently practice the correct approach, emphasizing the need for deliberate effort.
So it's about being self-aware, understanding your weaknesses, and working to improve them.
Exactly, yeah. They address this challenge of transitioning from pad drills to more dynamic live fight training.